The Sisters of Stonebridge. In the quaint town of Stonebridge, the Lawrence residence was a pillar of the community. Built by the Lawrence family generations ago, it stood proudly on the corner of Maple and Elm, an elegant ivy-covered house that echoed with the memories of its esteemed inhabitants. Over the years, the Lawrences had cemented their reputation as one of Stonebridge's most respected families, and their legacy was carried forward by the Lawrence sisters, Isolde and Celeste. Isolde, the elder by 2 years, was an ambitious corporate lawyer with a razor-sharp intellect and a reputation for excellence. With striking features and a calm, collected demeanor, she was admired for her sophistication and drive. Her life was a carefully orchestrated symphony of achievements. She worked long hours, dressed impeccably in tailored suits, and was a familiar face at charity galas and corporate events. Despite her success, those closest to her sensed an emptiness she couldn't quite fill, a lingering dissatisfaction hidden behind her perfect smile. Celeste, her younger sister, was the opposite. A free-spirited artist, Celeste had a magnetic charm that drew people to her like moths to a flame. She was known for her infectious laughter, vibrant energy, and a creative spirit that often manifested in her bold paintings and daring sculptures. Her life was messy, a kaleidoscope of half-finished art projects, spontaneous road trips, and late-night parties. But where Isolde sought control, Celeste found joy in chaos. Her style was bohemian, her personality effervescent, and she radiated a warmth that charmed even the most stoic townspeople. Despite their differences, the Lawrence sisters shared a deep bond. Growing up, they had been inseparable. Isolde was Celeste's protector, while Celeste brought color and spontaneity into Isolde's regimented world. Together, they were a formidable pair, balancing each other's extremes with love and respect. They were best friends, confidants, and each other's greatest supporters. Neither sister could imagine anything that would break the bond they shared. But then, one summer, a new resident moved into the house next door. His name was Alaric Thorne, and his arrival was like a breath of fresh air, or a spark to dry tinder, depending on who you asked. Alaric was an enigmatic figure, his past shrouded in mystery. Rumor had it he was a former war correspondent, a man who had seen the world's darkest corners and returned wiser but weary. In his mid-30s, he was handsome in a rugged way, with dark curls, piercing eyes, and an easy, charismatic smile. Stonebridge residents couldn't help but wonder what had brought him to their quiet town, but Alaric remained elusive, revealing little about his past. The sisters each met Alaric separately, but the encounters left both of them captivated. Isolde was the first to meet him, on a crisp morning as she jogged past his house. He had just stepped out to get the mail, and they nearly collided. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Isolde felt her breath hitch, an unfamiliar sensation for someone so composed. Alaric greeted her with a warm smile and an apology, and they exchanged a few polite words. Isolde continued her run, but her mind was left spinning, replaying the brief interaction. Later that day, Celeste encountered Alaric while she was sketching at the local park. He stopped to admire her work, and they fell into a lively conversation about art, travel, and the beauty of life's fleeting moments. Alaric's insight and passion for the world's wonders intrigued Celeste. She found herself talking to him as if they were old friends, sharing stories and laughing in a way that felt entirely natural. That evening, as the sisters recounted their day over dinner, they both spoke of Alaric. Isolde mentioned him with a reserved interest, while Celeste's eyes sparkled as she described their conversation. Neither realized the significance of their reactions, nor the silent undercurrent of competition that was beginning to brew. As the days passed, both sisters found themselves drawn to Alaric. What started as a mild curiosity blossomed into fascination. Isolde, usually so focused on her career, began adjusting her morning jogs to pass by his house. Celeste, meanwhile, made excuses to paint in the park, hoping for a chance to see him. Alaric seemed to enjoy their company, unaware of the rivalry growing between the two women. Isolde's approach was intellectual. She engaged Alaric in discussions about politics, history, and global issues. He listened attentively, offering perspectives she found refreshing and challenging. For the first time, she felt understood by someone outside of her professional world. Alaric's empathy and insight opened a door she hadn't known she wanted to open. A door that led to vulnerability. Celeste, however, appealed to a different side of Alaric. With her free-spirited nature, she reminded him of life's beauty and simplicity. She showed him her favorite spots in town, took him to hidden trails, and introduced him to local artists. Their time together was filled with laughter, warmth, and a lightheartedness that made Alaric feel at ease. For Alaric, spending time with both sisters was invigorating. With Isolde, he found an intellectual equal, a woman who could debate fiercely and see the world's complexity. With Celeste, he rediscovered joy and spontaneity, reconnecting with the simple pleasures he'd often overlooked. He was charmed by both women, but he had no idea of the silent battle waging between them. What began as lighthearted admiration quickly morphed into an unspoken rivalry. The sisters' interactions with Alaric became a game of one-upmanship, each seeking to win his favor. At first, the competition was subtle, hidden beneath smiles and polite conversation. But as the summer wore on, their rivalry grew more intense, seeping into every interaction. Isolde started attending local events she would have otherwise ignored, hoping to impress Alaric with her community spirit. She brought him books, recommending titles she thought would resonate with him. Celeste, in response, began inviting him to local art exhibitions, introducing him to her creative circle. She painted pieces inspired by their conversations, subtly hinting at her feelings. For the first time in their lives, the sisters began to drift apart. They spent less time together, each preoccupied with thoughts of Alaric. Their conversations became strained, their laughter forced. The bond that had once been their greatest strength was now a source of tension, and their friends and neighbors couldn't help but notice the shift. The turning point came with Stonebridge's annual summer gala, a grand event held in the town's historic mansion. It was the social highlight of the season, and the Lawrence sisters were always the center of attention, admired for their elegance and charm. This year, however, the atmosphere was different. Both sisters had extended separate invitations to Alaric, hoping he would attend as their date. When Alaric arrived, looking dashing in a classic black tuxedo, he greeted them both warmly, seemingly oblivious to the silent war between them. Throughout the evening, Isolde and Celeste took turns monopolizing his attention, each trying to outshine the other. Isolde dazzled him with her knowledge of fine wines, guiding him through the tasting with an air of expertise. Celeste, not to be outdone, swept him onto the dance floor, her laughter ringing out as she twirled him around. By the end of the night, the sisters were exhausted, their once unbreakable bond now frayed and brittle. They watched Alaric drive away, each lost in her own thoughts. They had always been each other's support, but now, for the first time, they saw each other as rivals. As summer turned to autumn, the rivalry between Isolde and Celeste intensified. Every encounter with Alaric was charged with tension, every glance filled with unspoken meaning. The sisters, once inseparable, were now locked in a silent battle for the affection of the same man. Neither was willing to back down, and neither realized the toll it was taking on their family, their friendship, and themselves. The idyllic community of Stonebridge, once a place of harmony and peace, was about to witness a storm born from love, jealousy, and ambition, one that would leave scars on the Lawrence family and the town they had called home for generations. And as the first leaves began to fall, so too did the last remnants of the sisters' once unbreakable bond. Cracks beneath the surface. Autumn swept over Stonebridge in shades of red, gold, and orange, casting a warm glow over the town. For the Lawrence sisters, however, the change in season only deepened the chill between them. The rivalry that had once been a subtle undercurrent was now a palpable tension, visible in every strained smile and fleeting glance. The townsfolk, who had long admired the sisters' unity, whispered among themselves, sensing a discord that had never been present before. Isolde, typically a master of composure, found herself unraveling in small but noticeable ways. Her work, which had always been her sanctuary, now felt like an obligation she couldn't escape. She caught herself glancing at her phone during meetings, checking for messages from Alaric, hoping for an invitation to coffee or a spontaneous stroll. Her colleagues noticed her distraction, her friends noticed her absence, but Isolde brushed off their concern. She told herself she was fine, that this was just a phase, an infatuation she'd soon outgrow. But as the days turned into weeks, Isolde couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness gnawing at her. Alaric had stirred something within her, a desire she hadn't felt in years. She craved his presence, his voice, the way he looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and admiration. She began crafting her days around the possibility of seeing him, adjusting her schedule, even taking her lunch breaks at the cafe he frequented. It was a far cry from her usual disciplined routine, and yet she couldn't help herself. Celeste, on the other hand, was more open about her feelings. She made no effort to hide her interest in Alaric, often speaking about him with a dreamy smile that bordered on infatuation. Her friends teased her about her crush, and she laughed it off, though her feelings ran much deeper than simple attraction. Alaric represented something magical to her. A muse, a source of inspiration, a companion who shared her love for beauty and adventure. She found herself daydreaming about him, painting scenes of their imaginary life together, each stroke of her brush capturing the warmth and light he had brought into her life. Their friends noticed the shift, the way the sisters spoke of Alaric, as if he were an object of desire rather than a person. They noticed the subtle competition, the possessiveness in their voices when they recounted their time with him. Concerned, some of them tried to intervene, suggesting that the sisters talk openly, that they address the growing tension before it became irreversible. But Isolde and Celeste brushed off their friends' concerns, each convinced that the other would eventually step aside. The turning point came when Alaric invited both sisters to a wine-tasting event in a nearby vineyard. He framed it as a casual outing, a chance for them to unwind and enjoy the autumn air. Neither sister wanted to decline the invitation, though they knew that attending together would be awkward. They put on polite smiles, convincing themselves that they could handle it, that this event would be nothing more than a friendly gathering. The vineyard was breathtaking, with rows of grapevines stretching as far as the eye could see. The air was crisp, tinged with the scent of ripe fruit and damp earth, and the golden light of late afternoon cast a warm glow over everything. Alaric greeted them both with his usual charm, completely unaware of the storm brewing between them. He led them through the vineyard, talking about the winemaking process, his voice filled with genuine enthusiasm. Isolde seized the opportunity to engage him in conversation about the complexities of wine culture, hoping to impress him with her knowledge. Alaric listened intently, nodding as she explained the nuances of different grape varieties and the art of wine pairing. Celeste, meanwhile, observed quietly, her heart sinking as she watched her sister monopolize Alaric's attention. She felt invisible, sidelined, and for the first time, a pang of resentment surfaced in her heart. As the sun began to set, the group moved to a small patio overlooking the vineyard, where a sommelier poured glasses of red and white wine. They sipped in silence, taking in the beauty of the landscape. Alaric, sensing the quiet tension, turned to Celeste, asking about her latest art project. Celeste's face lit up, and she eagerly shared her vision. A series of paintings inspired by autumn's transition, capturing the fleeting beauty of nature as it changed. Alaric listened with genuine interest, complimenting her creativity and the depth of her ideas. For a moment, Celeste forgot her jealousy, basking in his praise, feeling seen and appreciated. She looked over at Isolde, expecting the supportive smile, but instead saw a flicker of irritation in her sister's eyes. It was subtle, barely perceptible, but enough to remind Celeste that their bond was no longer what it once was. As the evening wore on, the tension grew more obvious. Small remarks, once playful, took on an edge. Isolde made a comment about the impracticality of Celeste's artist lifestyle, to which Celeste retorted with a jab about Isolde's soulless corporate world. Alaric tried to lighten the mood, but the sisters' rivalry was now fully visible, each of them vying for his attention, each unwilling to back down. At one point, Isolde excused herself to take a phone call, leaving Celeste and Alaric alone. Seizing the opportunity, Celeste leaned closer to him, her voice soft and sincere. "Alaric, I know this might be forward, but I felt something special between us. I don't want to pretend it's not there." Alaric looked at her, taken aback. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say anything, Isolde returned, her face flushed with anger. She had overheard enough of their conversation to understand the implications, and she felt a surge of betrayal and resentment. "So that's what this is, then." Isolde's voice was cold, cutting. "You're trying to steal him from me, Celeste." Celeste's eyes widened in shock, hurt flashing across her face. "Steal him? Isolde, you're acting like he belongs to you. He's a person, not a prize." The two sisters stood facing each other, the tension boiling over into a confrontation that neither had anticipated. Alaric, sensing the gravity of the situation, stepped back, watching with a mixture of confusion and regret. He had never intended to come between them, had never wanted to be the cause of such bitterness. "Isolde, this isn't about winning or losing," Celeste continued, her voice trembling. "I care about him, just like you do. But this competition, this animosity, it's tearing us apart." Isolde scoffed, crossing her arms. "Funny how you only realized that after I started getting close to him. Admit it, Celeste. You've always been jealous. You've always wanted what I have, and now you're trying to take him too." Celeste's eyes filled with tears, her voice barely a whisper. "I never wanted to compete with you, Isolde. I never wanted any of this, but I won't let you dictate who I can or can't love." Alaric, sensing the need to intervene, gently placed a hand on each of their shoulders. "Please, let's not do this. You're sisters. Whatever I may have brought into your lives, I don't want it to destroy what you've built together." The sisters fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. But the damage had already been done. The rift between them, once a subtle crack, had widened into a chasm, and neither was willing to cross it. They left the vineyard that night in separate cars, each consumed by their own thoughts, their own regrets. For the first time in their lives, they didn't share a ride home, didn't end the night with laughter and stories. Instead, they drove through the darkened streets of Stonebridge, each haunted by the realization that their bond, the one thing they had always counted on, was beginning to fracture. Autumn turned colder, and so did their relationship. The Lawrence sisters, once the closest of friends, now found themselves in a silent war, their love for each other overshadowed by jealousy and heartbreak. And though they didn't know it yet, the choices they were about to make would change their lives, and the lives of those around them, forever. Seeds of resentment. In the weeks following the confrontation at the vineyard, the Lawrence sisters' lives took on a new and uneasy rhythm. They barely spoke, moving through the same spaces as strangers, each unwilling to confront the depth of their animosity. The once vibrant laughter that had echoed through the Lawrence household was replaced by an uncomfortable silence, a palpable tension that everyone in Stonebridge seemed to feel. Friends who once admired the sisters' unity began to whisper about the obvious cracks in their bond, their faces a mixture of concern and fascination. Isolde threw herself into her work with a renewed intensity, trying to drown out the emotions that simmered just beneath her polished exterior. She spent long hours at the office, volunteering for projects and taking on high-profile cases that demanded every ounce of her focus. Her colleagues noticed the change, the slight edge in her voice, the way her jaw clenched when she thought no one was watching. She was determined to reclaim control, to fortify the walls around her heart that had been weakened by Ularic's presence. Yet no matter how hard she worked, she couldn't silence the lingering memories. Those fleeting moments when she had felt something beyond her career, something deeply human and vulnerable. The thought that Alaric might prefer Celeste over her stung in a way she couldn't quite articulate. She had always been the accomplished one, the admired one, the steady rock in her family. For the first time in her life, she felt less, and it was a feeling she loathed. Celeste, on the other hand, found herself drifting through her days in a haze of sadness and resentment. Her art, once a source of joy and expression, now felt like a hollow shell of what it had been. She tried painting, sketching, even sculpting, but everything she created seemed lifeless, as if her emotions had leached the color from her work. She missed Isolde, missed the warmth and support they had shared, but every attempt to bridge the gap was thwarted by the bitterness that now defined their relationship. One evening, Celeste tried to paint Alaric's likeness, hoping to capture his rugged charm and quiet strength. She thought that maybe, through art, she could exorcise the feelings she harbored for him, bring some clarity to the chaotic emotions swirling inside her. But as she worked, she found herself painting two figures, her and Isolde, standing on opposite sides of a chasm, each reaching out but unable to touch. The realization left her heart heavy. Alaric was not just a man she admired. He had become the wedge driving her and her sister apart. In the midst of this turmoil, Alaric remained blissfully unaware of the depths of the sisters' resentment. He noticed the change in their demeanor, the way they interacted with him and with each other, but he assumed it was a simple rivalry, one that would soon pass. He continued spending time with both sisters, enjoying Isolde's intellectual conversations and Celeste's creative spirit, never fully grasping the toll his presence was taking on them. But then came the night of the Stonebridge Harvest Festival. The Harvest Festival was a grand event, a celebration that brought together the entire community with food, music, and games. The town square was transformed into a magical landscape of twinkling lights and autumn decorations, with stalls offering everything from caramel apples to handmade crafts. It was one of Stonebridge's most cherished traditions, and the Lawrence sisters had attended every year since they were children, always side by side. This year, however, they arrived separately. Isolde arrived first, her sharp, tailored outfit and composed demeanor setting her apart from the more relaxed festival goers. She scanned the crowd for Alaric, her heart pounding despite her best efforts to appear nonchalant. When she finally spotted him near a stall, deep in conversation with some locals, she made her way over, her heels clicking on the cobblestone path with quiet determination. They exchanged polite greetings and soon found themselves discussing the symbolism of autumn. Isolde bringing up themes of change and resilience, drawing parallels between the festival and the complexities of human life. Alaric listened intently, his gaze thoughtful, and Isolde felt a surge of satisfaction. Here, in this moment, she had his attention entirely to herself. But then Celeste arrived, dressed in a flowing, bohemian dress and carrying a handmade wreath of autumn leaves. She exuded warmth and charm as she weaved through the crowd. She spotted Alaric and Isolde, her expression brightening for a split second before she noticed the intensity in her sister's eyes. Steeling herself, she approached them, flashing a radiant smile as she greeted Alaric, her voice light and cheerful. "Alaric, isn't this beautiful?" she said, gesturing to the festival around them. "This is my favorite time of year. Everything feels so alive, so full of possibility." Alaric smiled, nodding in agreement, and Isolde felt her hand tighten around her clutch. The easy way Celeste spoke to him, the carefree nature of her charm, it grated against Isolde's carefully curated composure. She felt herself fading into the background as Celeste laughed and twirled a strand of hair around her finger, her gaze locked on Alaric's. And then, in a moment of uncharacteristic spontaneity, Celeste turned to Alaric with a mischievous grin. "Dance with me," she said, taking his hand and pulling him towards the open space where couples were swaying to the music. Isolde watched as Alaric, caught off guard, but clearly charmed, allowed himself to be led onto the makeshift dance floor. She felt a pang of betrayal, followed by a surge of anger. Celeste's audacity, her boldness, It was as if she were deliberately flaunting her connection with Alaric, taunting Isolde with the carefree intimacy they shared. As the dance continued, Isolde's emotions spiraled. She tried to tell herself that it was just a dance, that she was overreacting. But her mind was consumed by jealousy and frustration, her usual control slipping as she watched Celeste laugh and spin with Alaric, their movements fluid and graceful, their connection undeniable. Unable to watch any longer, Isolde turned away and wandered through the crowd, her mind racing. She felt the weight of her pride, her need to be the best, the most admired. And yet here she was, losing to her own sister, watching her dreams crumble while Celeste flourished. As she moved deeper into the festival, she found herself at a small stand offering cider. She took a glass, sipping the warm liquid, hoping it would calm her nerves. But then she heard a familiar voice. Isolde. She turned to find Alaric standing behind her, his expression softened with concern. He seemed to have left Celeste on the dance floor, noticing her absence. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. "You seemed upset." Isolde forced a smile, though her heart was breaking. "I'm fine, Alaric. Just needed a moment to myself." He studied her, his gaze searching. "You know, you don't have to be so strong all the time," he said, his voice gentle. "It's okay to let people in." His words struck a nerve, and before she could stop herself, the words tumbled out. Do you care about Celeste more than me?" Alaric's eyes widened in surprise. "What? No, Isolde. But she interrupted, her voice tinged with desperation. "It's just, she's so different, so free, so everything I'm not. I feel like I'm losing you, Alaric, before I ever really had you." Alaric's expression softened, and he reached out, touching her shoulder gently. "Isolde, I'm not some prize to be won or lost. I care about both of you, each in different ways. But this rivalry, this jealousy, it's tearing you apart. It's not who you are." Isolde looked down, her cheeks flushed with shame. She knew he was right, knew that this bitterness was destroying everything she valued. But letting go of her pride, her need to be the best, it felt impossible. Before she could respond, Celeste appeared, her face a mask of confusion and hurt as she took in the scene. "Am I interrupting?" she asked, her voice wavering. Isolde and Alaric both turned to her, the silence between them heavy in charge. The air crackled with unspoken words, unfulfilled desires, and the weight of a bond stretched to its breaking point. In that moment, all three of them realized the truth, that the love they had hoped to nurture, the connection they had cherished, was now a poison running through their lives. And though none of them could admit it, they knew that the choices they were about to make would either save them or destroy them. The festival lights twinkled above, casting a soft glow over the tense scene. But there was no warmth in those lights, no comfort in the gentle music that played in the background. There was only the cold realization that the seeds of resentment had taken root, and the path ahead would be darker than any of them could have foreseen. Fractured foundations. In the weeks that followed the Harvest Festival, Stonebridge's tight-knit community began to feel the ripple effects of the Lawrence sisters' growing feud. Gossip circulated like wildfire, fueled by subtle glances, tense exchanges, and the unmistakable absence of their once cherished camaraderie. Friends who had once looked up to the Lawrence sisters as paragons of sibling harmony now spoke in hushed tones, sharing theories and whispers about the mysterious man who had come between them. Isolde buried herself even further in her work, throwing herself into her cases with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Her career had always been a source of pride, a carefully constructed fortress that shielded her from the vulnerability she despised. But now, that fortress felt like a prison. Her mind, usually so sharp and focused, wandered incessantly back to Alaric, and inevitably to Celeste. Every late night at the office, every victory in the courtroom, felt hollow, a pale shadow of the joy she had once derived from her achievements. But Isolde was nothing if not stubborn. She convinced herself that if she worked hard enough, if she excelled beyond anyone's expectations, she could somehow reclaim her sense of self-worth. She spent her days in boardrooms and courtrooms, her nights combing through case files, her heart heavy with a mix of ambition and loneliness. Her friends noticed her withdrawal, the way she avoided social gatherings, the rare moments when her usually confident facade seemed to falter. But Isolde brushed off their concern, insisting that she was fine, that she was simply busy. Celeste, meanwhile, found herself caught in a creative block that felt suffocating. Her art, once a source of passion and freedom, now felt like an insurmountable challenge. She would sit in front of a blank canvas for hours, brush in hand, the colors swirling in her mind, but refusing to take form. She tried painting Alaric, capturing the intensity of his gaze, the warmth of his smile, but each attempt ended in frustration. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the image of Isolde standing beside him, their shoulders brushing, the closeness between them a painful reminder of her sister's unspoken claim. The sisters continued to avoid each other, each retreating into their own world of pain and resentment. They no longer shared dinners, no longer exchanged late-night confidences. The house that had once been filled with laughter and love was now a silent battleground, every shared space a reminder of the fractured bond that neither of them could repair. Alaric, oblivious to the depth of their estrangement, continued to reach out to both sisters, hoping to ease the tension between them. He invited them to casual outings, tried to engage them in lighthearted conversations, unaware that his presence was the very catalyst for their feud. He couldn't understand why the sisters, once so inseparable, now seemed to barely tolerate being in the same room. He sensed the weight of their glances, the undercurrent of hostility that simmered just beneath the surface, but he attributed it to sibling rivalry, convinced that it would eventually pass. But the truth was far darker than he realized. One evening, as the first snowflakes began to fall over Stonebridge, Alaric invited both sisters to his home for a small gathering. He had intended it to be a simple affair, a chance for them to reconnect in a relaxed setting. He set out a spread of wine and cheese, decorated his living room with soft lighting, and put on a playlist of gentle jazz music. He hoped that the warmth of the evening would melt the ice that had formed between them. Isolde arrived first, her posture as rigid as ever, her eyes scanning the room with a hint of apprehension. She accepted a glass of wine from Alaric, forcing a smile as they exchanged pleasantries. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, a mixture of anticipation and dread. She hadn't seen Celeste in weeks, and the thought of facing her sister in Alaric's presence filled her with an anxiety she struggled to hide. Celeste arrived a few minutes later, her expression a mixture of warmth and uncertainty. She, too, accepted a glass of wine, her eyes darting between Alaric and Isolde, sensing the tension in the air. The three of them sat down, the conversation stilted and awkward, each of them struggling to find a topic that wouldn't deepen the divide between the sisters. For a while, they managed to maintain a semblance of normalcy, talking about mundane topics, the weather, recent events in town, the holiday decorations that had started to appear on Stonebridge's quaint streets. But the undercurrent of tension was palpable, a silent reminder of the unresolved emotions that simmered just beneath the surface. Then, as the evening wore on, and the wine flowed more freely, Alaric made an innocuous comment about how much he admired Isolde's dedication to her work. He praised her for her ambition, her determination, and the impact she had made in her field. He spoke with genuine admiration, his tone warm and sincere. Celeste's face fell, her expression darkening as she took in his words. She felt the sting of jealousy, the familiar ache that had become all too common since Alaric had entered their lives. She glanced at Isolde, who was smiling smugly, basking in Alaric's praise. The sight ignited a spark of anger within her, a resentment that had been building for far too long. "Of course you admire Isolde," Celeste said, her voice laced with bitterness. "She's always been the perfect one, hasn't she? The one who has it all together, the one everyone admires." Isolde's smile faltered, her gaze narrowing as she turned to her sister. "Excuse me." Celeste's voice rose, her frustration spilling over. "You act like you're so perfect, Isolde. Like nothing, and no one can touch you. But maybe you're not as flawless as you think. Maybe there's more to life than climbing the corporate ladder and pretending to be better than everyone else." Isolde's cheeks flushed with anger, her voice cold and controlled. "Just because you can't commit to anything doesn't mean you get to judge me for my choices, Celeste. Not everyone has the luxury of flitting from one passion to another without a care in the world." Celeste's eyes filled with tears, her hands trembling as she held her glass. "Maybe I don't have your success, Isolde, but at least I'm not pretending to be someone I'm not. At least I'm honest about who I am." The room fell silent, Alaric looking between the sisters with a stunned expression. He had known there was tension, but he hadn't realized the depth of their resentment, the bitterness that had poisoned their relationship. "Is this what it's come to?" Alaric asked quietly, his voice filled with disappointment. "Fighting over what exactly? My attention? My approval?" Neither sister responded, their silence a painful acknowledgement of the truth. They had allowed their love for Alaric, or perhaps, more accurately, their rivalry for his affection, to destroy the bond they had once held dear. Alaric shook his head, setting down his wineglass. "I never wanted this. I never wanted to come between you two. I thought I could be a part of your lives, but I can see now that my presence has only hurt you." Celeste's face crumpled, her voice choked with regret. "Alaric, no, it's not your fault. We did this to ourselves." Isolde looked away, her expression hardening as she struggled to keep her emotions in check. She couldn't bear the thought of losing Alaric, of admitting that her pride and jealousy had led them to this moment. But deep down, she knew he was right. Alaric rose from his seat, his gaze lingering on each sister in turn. "I think it's best if I keep my distance for a while. You both need to figure out what you want, not just from me, but from each other." Without another word, he left the room, leaving the sisters alone in a silence thick with unspoken pain. They sat there, side by side, yet worlds apart, each grappling with the weight of their choices. For the first time, they were forced to confront the reality of what they had done. The man they had fought so bitterly for was gone, and all that remained was the fractured foundation of their relationship, a bond once so strong now reduced to ashes. The snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the town in a silence as cold and unyielding as the rift between the Lawrence sisters. Neither of them spoke, each lost in their own regret, their own heartbreak. And in that silence, they both realized that some wounds, once inflicted, could never fully heal. A chasm too wide. Winter descended upon Stonebridge, casting a somber and muted veil over the town. The once lively streets were quieter, as if even the residents sensed the tension and sorrow simmering beneath the surface. For Isolde and Celeste, the cold mirrored the state of their relationship, frozen, fractured, and seemingly beyond repair. Following Alaric's departure, both sisters retreated further into themselves, each carrying the weight of their choices and regrets. Their once shared spaces now felt divided, like territories marked by invisible lines. They lived in the same house but passed each other like ghosts, each too proud or too ashamed to reach out, to bridge the chasm that had grown between them. Isolde's work became her sole focus, her escape from the feelings she couldn't bear to confront. She immersed herself in every case, every client, driving herself to exhaustion with relentless intensity. Her colleagues noticed the change. Isolde Lawrence, who had once been admired for her composed efficiency, now seemed haunted, her eyes shadowed with fatigue and sadness. One evening, as she sat in her office, reviewing a case file long past midnight, her mind drifted back to the conversation with Alaric, the last one they'd had before he walked out. His words echoed in her mind. "You both need to figure out what you want, not just from me, but from each other." She knew, deep down, that her pursuit of Alaric had been less about love and more about validation, about proving something to herself and to Celeste. But that realization brought her no comfort. If anything, it deepened the hollow ache inside her. She had sacrificed her bond with her sister for a fleeting infatuation, and now she was left with nothing but her work and an unbearable sense of regret. Across town, Celeste was struggling in her own way. Her art, once vibrant and full of life, had grown dark and chaotic. She painted with a ferocity that bordered on desperation, pouring her pain onto the canvas in strokes of deep blues and angry reds. Her once cheerful studio was now filled with haunting, abstract images, each one a testament to the anguish and loneliness that had taken root in her heart. Friends and neighbors noticed her withdrawal, her transformation. The Celeste they had known, the free-spirited, joyful artist, seemed to have disappeared, replaced by someone distant and somber. Invitations to gatherings and art shows went unanswered, her social circle slowly shrinking as she isolated herself further. One cold December afternoon, as she stood before a blank canvas, Celeste felt an overwhelming wave of frustration. No matter how much she tried to express herself through her art, it wasn't enough. She felt trapped, suffocated by the guilt and regret that lingered like a shadow. She missed Isolde. She missed the laughter, the late-night conversations, the bond they had shared that had once seemed unbreakable. The realization was painful, a bitter truth that she could no longer deny. In trying to find love and validation through Alaric, she had lost the one person who had always been there for her. And now, as she stared at the empty canvas, she knew that no amount of paint or creativity could fill the void in her life. That night, Celeste made a decision. She couldn't continue living like this, haunted by the past, by the choices she had made. She knew that if there was any chance of mending her relationship with Isolde, she had to take the first step. The thought filled her with anxiety. What if Isolde rejected her? What if their bond was too damaged to repair? But she couldn't let fear hold her back any longer. She would rather face rejection than spend another day in this cold, lonely silence. The following evening, she waited until she knew Isolde was home, then knocked on her sister's bedroom door. There was a long pause, and for a moment, Celeste wondered if Isolde would ignore her, if the door would remain closed, a barrier between them. Finally, she heard footsteps, and the door opened. Isolde stood there, her expression unreadable, her face pale and tired. Celeste hesitated, her carefully rehearsed words slipping away as she looked into her sister's eyes, seeing the pain and exhaustion that mirrored her own. "Can we talk?" Celeste asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Isolde didn't respond immediately. She looked at Celeste, her gaze wary, as if unsure whether to let her guard down. But after a tense moment, she stepped aside, allowing Celeste into the room. They sat down, an uncomfortable silence stretching between them. Neither knew where to begin, each weighed down by unspoken words and unhealed wounds. Finally, Celeste took a deep breath, her voice trembling as she spoke. "I'm sorry," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "I'm sorry for everything. For letting my feelings get in the way, for letting Alaric come between us. I never wanted to hurt you." Isolde's expression softened, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through her stoic exterior. She looked away, her hands clenched in her lap as she struggled to maintain her composure. "I'm sorry too," she whispered. "I let my pride and jealousy ruin our relationship. I thought I needed to prove something, that I needed to be the best, even with him. But I was wrong." The sisters sat in silence, each grappling with the weight of their confessions. For the first time in months, they were truly listening to each other, allowing themselves to be honest and vulnerable. "It's strange, isn't it?" Celeste continued, her voice filled with a bittersweet sadness. "We both wanted him, but I don't think either of us really knew why. Maybe it wasn't even about him at all." Isolde nodded slowly, her gaze distant. "Maybe we were both just searching for something to fill a void, something to make us feel whole. And we thought he could give us that." They shared a small, tentative smile, the first glimpse of the bond they had once shared. But even as they acknowledged their mistakes, they knew that healing wouldn't be easy. The scars of their rivalry, of the choices they had made, ran deep. "I miss you," Celeste said quietly, her voice breaking. "I miss the way things used to be." Isolde's eyes softened, and for the first time, she reached out, placing a hand on Celeste's. "I miss you too." They sat there, holding hands, each finding comfort in the other's presence. It wasn't a solution, it wasn't a complete reconciliation, but it was a start, a fragile step toward rebuilding what had been lost. In the days that followed, they made an effort to spend time together, to talk openly about their feelings and their mistakes. They went for walks, shared meals, even laughed together, though the laughter was tinged with a sadness that neither could fully shake. But despite their best efforts, a shadow lingered between them. The events of the past few months had changed them, had altered the foundation of their relationship in ways they couldn't ignore. There was a distance now, a hesitation that hadn't existed before. They were closer, yes, but not the same. One evening, as they sat in the living room, watching the snow fall outside, Celeste broke the silence. "Do you think we'll ever really go back to how we were before?" Isolde looked at her, a sad smile on her lips. "I don't know. Maybe we're not meant to go back. Maybe we just move forward and try to be better." Celeste nodded, her heart heavy with the knowledge that some things, once broken, could never be fully mended. They could rebuild, they could forgive, but they couldn't erase the pain or the memories. Their bond would always bear the scars of their choices, a reminder of the cost of their rivalry. And though they would continue to love each other, to support each other, they both understood that something had been lost, a piece of their innocence, a piece of their trust. It was a painful truth, but one they would have to accept if they were to find peace. As the snow continued to fall, blanketing Stonebridge in a quiet stillness, the Lawrence sisters sat side by side, each lost in thought, each grappling with the past and the uncertain future. They had chosen to forgive, to move forward, but they both knew that the path ahead would be long and difficult, a journey through the shadows of what they had once shared. And as they sat there, watching the world outside, they realized that their greatest challenge would not be forgetting the past, but learning to live with it. As winter deepened and the days grew shorter, the Lawrence sisters continued to navigate the fragile truce they had established. The snow-covered streets of Stonebridge, once vibrant with holiday lights and laughter, seemed subdued, mirroring the somber state of their relationship. Though they had both expressed their apologies, the road to healing was far from complete. Forgiveness had been offered, but true reconciliation demanded more, a rebuilding of trust, a rekindling of their once unbreakable bond. For Celeste, the return to her art studio marked a pivotal step in her journey toward healing. Her studio, once a place of vibrant colors and joy, had become a space filled with unfinished and chaotic works, each a testament to the turmoil that had gripped her life. Now, as she stood before the canvases with fresh brushes and blank canvases, she felt an urge to create something new, something that would capture the pain, the regret, but also the hope for a new beginning. She started painting a scene of two figures standing on opposite sides of a ravine, reaching out to each other across the void. As she worked, layer by layer, Celeste found herself pouring her heart into the canvas, capturing every nuance of the emotions she had experienced over the past months. Her hands moved instinctively, blending shades of blue, gray, and hints of warm colors, creating a piece that was both haunting and beautiful. It was a reflection of her journey, of the love she still held for Isolde, and of the pain they both had endured. When she finally stepped back to admire her work, she felt an overwhelming sense of release, as though she had freed a piece of her soul that had been trapped. She decided, with a trembling heart, to show it to Isolde. This painting would be her way of saying the things words couldn't express, a silent invitation to continue their journey of healing. The following evening, Celeste waited until Isolde was home before knocking on her door. This time, there was no hesitation. Isolde opened the door almost immediately, her expression curious but cautious as she noticed the large canvas in Celeste's hands. "I wanted to show you something," Celeste said softly, her gaze steady yet vulnerable. "I painted this for us." Isolde's eyes softened as she took in the painting, her gaze tracing the figures reaching out to each other, separated by a chasm yet bound by an unbreakable connection. She saw the longing, the regret, and the hope in the colors and strokes, each layer a testament to the love they still shared. "It's beautiful," Isolde whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She reached out, her hand brushing the edge of the canvas as though she could feel the emotions it conveyed. "Thank you, Celeste. This means more than you know." They stood there in silence, both feeling the weight of the past yet touched by the beauty of the moment. Celeste's painting was more than just art. It was a bridge, a symbol of their willingness to move forward despite the pain they had caused each other. Encouraged by this small victory, Isolde suggested they spend more time together, rebuilding their bond in small, meaningful ways. They began by cooking meals together, something they had always enjoyed as children. In the kitchen, they found an unexpected sense of ease, laughing over burned toast and misjudged spices. The simple act of sharing a meal became a balm to their wounded hearts, a reminder of the love that had always bound them. They also began attending community events together, volunteering for local causes that aligned with their passions. At first, their interactions with neighbors and friends were met with curious glances and whispered gossip. The town was still buzzing with stories of their fallout and the man who had come between them. But as the weeks passed, the community began to see a different side of the Lawrence sisters, a side that had matured, softened by the trials they had endured. The annual Stonebridge Winter Gala was the first major event they attended together since their rift had begun. The gala was a grand affair, held at the town's historic estate, with sparkling lights, elegant decor, and a live orchestra playing soft, enchanting music. It was the kind of event the sisters had once attended together with joy and laughter, their bond so strong that nothing seemed capable of breaking it. Dressed in elegant gowns, Isolde and Celeste entered the hall side by side. The crowd parted as they walked in, guests turning to watch them with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. But the sisters paid no mind, choosing instead to focus on each other, to savor the small victory of being together, despite the shadows of the past. At one point in the evening, as they stood by the large windows overlooking the snow-covered garden, Alaric appeared. He hadn't spoken to either of them in weeks, respecting the distance they needed to mend their bond. His face was calm, though there was a flicker of surprise and admiration as he saw them together. He approached cautiously, nodding to both of them. "It's good to see you two here, together." The sisters exchanged a glance before Isolde spoke, her tone polite but firm. "It's good to be here, Alaric. We've been working things out." Alaric smiled, a warm, genuine smile that spoke of relief and respect. "I'm glad. I never wanted to come between you two. You've both been through so much, and seeing you together like this, it's inspiring." Celeste nodded, her expression softened by gratitude. "Thank you, Alaric, for giving us the space we needed. It helped more than you know." There was a pause, a moment of quiet understanding as they acknowledged the impact he had on their lives. But it was a peaceful moment, free of the tension that had once plagued them. Alaric, sensing that his presence was no longer necessary, gave a gentle nod and excused himself, leaving the sisters alone once more. As the evening continued, Isolde and Celeste found themselves sharing stories and laughter, reliving memories that had been buried beneath months of bitterness and rivalry. They danced together, their laughter mingling with the soft strains of the music, a sight that brought a smile to everyone around them. For the first time in months, they felt like themselves, like sisters, best friends, and soulmates. In the days that followed, they continued to heal, taking each day as it came, supporting each other as they rebuilt the pieces of their lives. They both knew that the scars of their rivalry would always remain, a reminder of the choices they had made and the pain they had caused each other. But those scars also served as a testament to their resilience, a symbol of their ability to overcome even the darkest moments. Spring arrived in Stonebridge, bringing with it a sense of renewal. The snow melted, flowers bloomed, and the town came alive with color and warmth. For the Lawrence sisters, it was a season of rebirth, a chance to start anew. They embraced their differences, learning to appreciate the unique qualities that made each of them who they were. Isolde continued her work as a lawyer, but with a newfound sense of balance, no longer allowing her career to define her. She found joy in the small moments, the connection she had with the people she loved, and the knowledge that success was more than just professional achievements. Celeste, inspired by the healing she had experienced, poured herself into her art, creating pieces that celebrated resilience, forgiveness, and the beauty of imperfection. Her paintings gained recognition, her studio becoming a haven for those seeking solace and inspiration. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their family home, watching the sun set over Stonebridge, Isolde turned to Celeste, her gaze soft and reflective. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything. For forgiving me, for being patient, and for being my sister." Celeste smiled, reaching over to take her hand. "I wouldn't trade you for the world, Isolde. No matter what happens, you'll always be my sister, and I'll always be here." They sat in comfortable silence, the warmth of their bond filling the space between them. The pain of the past lingered, but it no longer defined them. They had walked through the darkness together, emerging stronger, wiser, and more deeply connected than ever before. As the stars appeared in the night sky, the Lawrence sisters knew that their journey was far from over. Life would bring new challenges, new trials, and perhaps even new heartaches. But they had each other, and that was enough. Together, they would face whatever the future held, knowing that their bond, though tested and scarred, was unbreakable. And as they sat on the porch, side by side, they found peace in the knowledge that they were not just sisters, but soulmates, two halves of a whole, bound by a love that nothing could ever destroy.